Well, I mean, that takes away the basic right of anyone to have their grievances heard. So I hope that's not what my friend from South Carolina meant. But I just want to point out that there was a lot of abuse, I think, of the NLRB during that process, even though the NLRB was doing exactly what we told them to do. Take into account all of the factors, look at all the evidence before you make a decision. That's what they were doing when it erupted here on the floor, and a lot of political pressure was put on the NLRB, a lot of political pressure, a lot of threats on the NLRB. And as it turned out, it all worked out because the union and Boeing got together, settled their differences, and we moved ahead. And that's the way it ought to be in our country. But we shouldn't cut off the right of people to actually file a complaint if they have a complaint. The duty of the NLRB is to investigate and to take into account all the factors before they issue any findings. But that never happened in that Boeing case because, as I said, people were good businesses, and Boeing is a good business. Boeing is one of our great businesses in this country. It does a lot for America. So you get the good businesses, and the Machinists Union is a great union. And they worked it out. And that's the way things ought to be done, and 9 times out of 10, that's the way it happens. And so what we're talking about here is just really the rules for NLRB to take care of those bad actors that are out there that like Dillard's and what they did to their people down in Arkansas and others, and to give people who want to form a union at least a level playing field without having all of these abuses and delays and intimidations and things like that. So that's what the issue is about, and hopefully this afternoon we'll have a good affirmative vote to uphold the ability of the National Labor Relations Board to issue this ruling. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
I would yield myself such time as I might consume. And